Welcome to the Art of Growth. We are back, and we've got a new season that I am extremely excited about. This is around one of the things we teach people when they first start coaching, which is about being a student of your story. And so we sent out a request for you to send in your story, talking about if you could go back to any one moment, what moment would it be and why? So we're going to have a whole season, all the panels of all the different Enneagram types, hearing stories from them, and then Joel and I will respond. So a few weeks ago, Joel and I sat down and we recorded the first 4 episodes. And after that, we started talking about an introduction and said, we need to record this right now. So we turned on the mics and had this conversation. And a lot of times we feel like we get a good idea across, but this one felt like pure magic to us. And we're really excited to share it with you today. With this season also comes the return of group coaching in March. I know some of you have been waiting a long time to get into one of our groups, and so that is going to be launching again. There will be information on our newsletter this week about that, so if you're not signed up for our newsletter, do that at www.theartofgrowth.org. So now let's go ahead and jump in with Joel and myself. I'm Jim Zartman. Hi. Introducing this season. All right, so we're doing a new panel season, a whole season where we ask people to call in and leave messages. And the prompt was, if you could go back to any one moment in time, what moment would that be and why? And we talk about practicing with the past. Like self-awareness includes understanding your own story, living into different moments. And for some people, they wanted to go back and think about what they would change in a particular moment. And for some people, they wanted to go back and experience a beautiful thing again. Both are equally valid. We didn't specify which direction you could go because we knew people would go in both directions. The majority of people did go back to a moment they would want to alter in some way or respond to from a more mature, grown perspective where they've learned something. But I think it's an interesting question because we always talk about being a student of your story, that your own story has so much to teach you. So that's one of the reasons we're doing this. And we just recorded 4 podcasts back to back, listening to some of these stories and being very moved by them, emotional. Some of them I teared up. Some of them made me, very angry. Some of them made me really curious, and I have things to think about because of that. Because like we've said, our purpose here is we're always trying to learn more from the people we're interacting with. So yeah, that's just kind of setting up a little bit about the series. But what is this bringing up for you as far as what we?
Well, and why are we doing this? I think has a lot to do with the stories that we find ourselves telling ourselves, and the stories that we all have that have shaped and formed us. And the stories are a combination of the event itself that we remember, and we don't remember things precisely as they happened. None of us do, right? There's enough research on that to prove that.
But actually, every time we remember it or retell the story, certain details about it change.
Yeah. And that's not because the goal is not to be precise in our remembering how every fact, because our psyche is trying to tell us something. And if we pay attention to that, we learn a lot. But it's a combination of both the event that took place and then our interpretation of that event. And that interpretation then means that we behave a certain way as a result of that story. Or maybe we behave a certain way and then we tell a story. I'm not sure of the order of that.
Okay.
But either way, the stories are very much a part of the way we currently live. And I think it's important to understand what we experienced and what we interpreted, what we believe about that story, what we believe about that event.
The story about the story.
Yeah.
The thing that really influences us is not the story, it's the story about the story.
Yeah. Which includes perspective about ourselves.
Yep.
A judgment about ourselves, a judgment about the world. And so it's important for us to be able to actually see that, be able to look at it, observe it, not judge the fact that we're judging, but observe, like, oh, interesting, with curiosity and openness. Interesting. This is the story I keep telling myself. Because we hear it in other people, those that we're really close to, right?
Right.
You hear the same story. It's like, as kids, oh my gosh, right? You know your parents' stories inside and out. It's like, I know exactly where you're going to go with this one. This event took place. I know what story you're going to repeat to us that you've told us 1,000 times. Here's why we need to prepare. It's because, and then it's like, and then there we go. Good old mom and dad, old people stories. And we hear them, and yet we do them ourselves now as grownups. And our friends can hear that. And our spouses, if we're our partners, if, we have one, they know the stories that we tell. Yeah. So I don't know. I think that that's something that's really interesting, that if we keep telling the same old story, that seems to frame the way we think about life in general.
Yeah.
And yet they're not changing. That's interesting. Why is the story not changing? Because it's absolutely true. Well, geez, that's interesting because your partner doesn't have the same stories and doesn't see the world in the same way.
Right.
So I'm wondering, is there some looseness that we can bring into that where we begin to hear other stories that have similar events, maybe similar experiences or different experiences, but we can look at that and say, boy, I would have reacted and I would have interpreted that very differently. I wonder if my story and my interpretation is the only one, or if I can learn something different. Because if I can learn something different here, then maybe I can have different outcomes. Maybe I can have different experiences in the present.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons we do things the way we do at the Art of Growth, is it is so much about like observing people's stories and in coaching and everything else. It's like when I know the specificity of your story, I can help you understand the lens of why, A, you tell the story that way, B, you're interpreting the meaning of that story in this way, and making space for that, saying that's totally understandable, and here's some other interpretations.
Yeah.
I just had a client who was talking about relating to a family member and helping them in a certain way, and the people around being like, well, you shouldn't give that kind of help. You shouldn't be doing this. And I was like, well, here, I can make arguments for both sides. And so this is why this is a hard situation. This is why you can't really judge yourself for going this way or this way, because I can make here's how I can make arguments for either way you go in that story. And I think it's important that we give ourselves a little bit of that space to do that, but also to observe and be aware that that's what we're doing, because so much of the results of our lives are not the result of the event, but the interpretation of the event and the story we tell ourselves about the event.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to be demonstrated through this whole season. You're not just hearing the story, you're hearing the story they tell themselves about the story, the interpretation of the story, and the meaning that gets attached to that. And therefore, this is what this says about life.
Yeah, and yours wouldn't be the same. So if you're listening to someone else tell a story, this is why so many times, have you ever, has this happened to you watching a movie or you're reading a book and the character is like living out a story and then they have a response to that and it's totally inconsistent with how you would have responded to that. Like, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have thought that way. And then in other cases, it's like exactly how you would have. And then you're just like, oh, I'm resonating 100% and identifying with this character. Yeah. And now, of course, I can look at it and go, oh, there's a reason why Ted Lasso 100% resonates with me. Like I look at it, I know what he's going to do. I know how he's thinking. I know what, yep, of course. And even if I don't, whatever his response is, it's consistent with how one of 5 different ways I might have responded. But then there's another character and it's like, no, that's not how I would have, how I would have thought about that or responded. And I think that's what makes it so interesting is you're watching and you're hearing and you're listening to these podcasts and these stories of these types. And for you to pay attention to your own story, like what would I have done in that? And what story am I telling myself that may not be helpful any longer to me?
Yep.
And the wonderful thing about humanity in general is we can change, like our capacity to change our thoughts, to change our behaviors. Man, we are lucky as humans that have that capacity to do so.
Yeah.
Animals generally don't. They can make small changes behaviorally, but we can make significant changes so that we have also significantly different results, relationally and in our jobs and so on. So,
which, sevens are particularly good at, but all of us have this capacity to either pull from other people. And sometimes that's the reason people go to a coach, to a therapist or something, is being like, is there another way to see this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because I need a different interpretation of this story.
Yeah.
And I've seen really great coaches, therapists do this. I saw one story that stuck out to me. I thought it was such an interesting response. Someone was sharing about who they'd become and some successes they'd have, but they were talking about what they'd have to overcome and this really painful experience that they experienced from a parental figure. And the coach's responsive was, so you actually have to also thank that parent.
Yeah.
Because if that had not happened, you would not have achieved this thing over here.
Yeah.
And it's like this shift in the story where all of a sudden this person was being like, oh,
yeah,
I wouldn't have been here. And when people tell their stories, sometimes they share really hard things that happened to them and they explain why they wouldn't have changed that.
Right.
Which I would have been like, oh my God, I totally would have changed that. I would, if I was expecting the story to go, and what I would change is I would have changed the situation so that event did not happen. But so many of them say, I wouldn't change the event, but I have to see it through this different lens, or I have this other experience, or I would respond to different on the back end, or there's a million different ways that you can take the story, but it's so much about this. It's not the story. It's the story we tell about the story. Hey, we're going to pause in the middle of this episode for a moment because I want to let you know about 2 new group coaching courses that will start on March 9th of 2023. One group is called Transformational Journey, and it focuses on the steps of our coaching methodology that includes self-knowledge, self-observation, and transformational habits. The other group is called Integration Practices and focuses on developing a healthy relationship with our 3 instincts, our 3 centers, and the 3 stances. And I will be leading both of those groups. If you're not sure you'd want to join a group, you can sign up for an interest meeting we're having on February 16th. And the links for signing up will be in the newsletter that goes out this week. And if you aren't signed up for our email list, you can do that at www.theartofgrowth.org. All right, back to Joel and I's conversation. It's so much about this. It's not the story. It's the story we tell about the story.
Yeah. And how narrow that is. So let me give an example. Growing up, I found myself having a tremendous struggle in school. Okay. So from start, I never did well in school. I had ADHD, but also probably some other things that were undiagnosed.
Yeah.
And so I could not pay attention or learn the way normal people learn.
Yeah.
So my reading was always reading comprehension was always one of my lowest scores. I'd read something and I could not understand what was being said.
Yeah.
I still to this day struggle enormously with reading comprehension.
Yeah.
Unless it's a book that is totally within my wheelhouse. And then I'm okay. I can read it and get a lot out of it. But
audiobooks? You can
audio is a
more
lot easier for me.
Yeah,
much easier. Reading is extraordinarily difficult for me.
Yep.
I don't understand things, particularly if it's in sort of sequential. Here's the steps to take. Here's what I have to read those at least a couple dozen times, and they're like simple. It's like 5 steps, but I have to read it multiple times, or I will screw it up. So like it's remarkable. I feel like real stupid in that space. Well, then I was told I was stupid growing up. So repeatedly, daily, like, you're dumb, you're a knucklehead, you're stupid, right? So fast forward all these years, terrible at school. I finally get out of school. I didn't even graduate. So I drop out, went and got my GED later. And so the story I told myself was, I'm not an academic, I'm not an intellectual. So what I sought out to do was stuff like construction work and that kind of thing. So I did that while I went to Bible school, actually. So I felt a call to that. And there I was a terrible student too, until I met Patty, who actually helped me. And she helped me my final year. And as a result, I was actually able to get, to my surprise, I got a 4.0, but it was because of her help. literally processing like work. So I got through that, right? But still, because even though I did and I got the 4.0, there was like this little bump of like confidence and like hope and thinking like maybe I can, maybe I do. So this is why I share the story. It says how many experiences you have and input you might have from others that tell you a different story about yourself, but you're not listening to that. Because people did tell me, Jill, you have insight. You're not a dummy.
Ideas,
like you're intelligent.
And you had put a self-limiting story about yourself because of certain experiences that were not just interpreted, but expanded to be a general rule over you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I lived from it, right? So if you live and you've got all this lived experience into that world, right? You can't take in data that's different than that. And so that's what I mean by like your story. And you're right. People do go to coaches. People go to friends. Oftentimes because we're trying to hear something different. There's an internal sense at which we're like, I know that there's more to me, right? I know there's more to life, but yet I need the confirmation of my bias because of how much I've lived from this space.
Yeah. Like I'm trying to enforce now the story I told myself then because I have so much investment.
It's sunk cost. What is it called? Sunk cost.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Bias. I mean, how much time and energy and
I've put so much energy into investing that I'm not smart. That I actually fight against the story that I am.
Yeah. It's scary to believe that and it's also scary. Like, could you imagine what that might look like if you didn't believe that? Like I've actually asked clients that, okay, so that's your story. Imagine if that weren't true. Could you believe a different one? Someone who's in recovery, always identifying herself as a recovering addict. I said, okay, I've heard you say that. So my intuition kicked in. You know, I don't know, I didn't have any reason for saying this, but I just intuitively, I said, what if that wasn't your starting point? What if that wasn't your only identity? She told me weeks later she hated that. Like, right. It was great. She said that with a laugh, but she said, you know, that really profoundly affected her because she started imagining her life different than that story being the overriding story and the interpretations around that, right? Because not everybody would have the same interpretation as she did. And then the result of how she was living, which was a very self-limiting kind of way of living. Yeah.
Oh, and I've totally done that. And I think maybe we do it for different reasons, but there was times that I wanted to accept a story because if that story isn't true, now I'm responsible to do this.
Oh, yes.
And I don't want to. I don't want to face that level of responsibility.
True. So true. So true.
And it's so horrifying to admit that.
Oh yeah.
But it's just true. Like, if this is true about me, then I'm not responsible. I can stay in this limited space.
Yeah.
But if this is not true about me, if I actually am capable in this way, if I can change this thing about my go 3 centers, right? Yeah. If I can change this thing about my body with my sleep and my eating and my if I can do that, and then that's going to change something in my emotional space with my anxiety, my depression, all that stuff, and that changes something in my headspace too with my like capacity and learning and ideas and generating. Then I'm now responsible to do all those things.
Oh yeah.
And it's like,
yeah. We don't really want that, do we?
No.
I mean, as a human species, I mean, we definitely prefer like I want to live smaller, right? Safer. Responsibility includes things like, so you have to have agency, you have to have, you know, some measure of autonomy, and certainly there's action that you have to take. There's a lot in there. And so responsibility, it calls you to a different way of being that you haven't experienced before. It's this wide, big, open world within you, not just externally, but within yourself. Oh, yeah. Oh, you named it, dude.
And people who pass through that and accept the responsibility and they are amazed at what they can accomplish.
Oh, yeah.
It's a celebration, but man, getting there.
That's the big thing.
Is no joke. It is training. Like we talk about this in one of the other episodes, but dealing with the internal opposition, not just the external opposition.
Yeah.
You know, the internal opponent.
That's the opponent internally. Yeah.
Yes. As well as the external opponent. So the story about the story, this is going to be something that I think it comes back around over and over again. Because when we talk about self-awareness, so when we talk about our coaching methodology that we do in group coaching, we have some group coaching groups that are going to be coming up soon. But the methodology is self-awareness, self-observation, transformational habits. Has to go through that stage. And sometimes we have to rewind and come back to that first stage again. It's like, what are you observing about yourself now that you're in this space?
Oh, yeah.
You're not there anymore. You're not back here.
Yeah.
Now you have to come into this space and you go, how do I understand that story from this perspective? Is there a different way of seeing my own life's experience?
Yeah. So you said self-awareness. I think we've been calling it as self-knowledge.
Yeah, self-knowledge.
So like this, because that has to do with like, so the distinction there, just to quickly say, for those of you who are listening and don't know the distinctions between them, it's like self-knowledge is what you know about yourself.
Yeah.
It's kind of past-based. It's like, okay, what have I learned about myself? What do I know about the way I behave in certain situations, how I think, how I feel? And then there's like the self-observation. So say a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, the self-observation of like, can I observe it now? Can I see myself being
moment.
Myself in real time?
That's harder.
I think that's
to me the hardest.
It is the hardest because it's a practice that never gets easier. Like it's not one that ever goes away.
Particularly as you were describing, in the new thing, whatever it is that's coming up for you now. Yeah.
Right. Because now I have to see myself being myself in real time now in this situation, under these circumstances, with these people, with these pressures.
Yeah.
Totally different situation. Oh, crap. Well, who am I now?
Yeah.
It's not a practice that's ever going to become unnecessary.
It. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's never mastered.
Yeah, I've already mastered that. I don't do that anymore.
I don't have to do that self-observation thing anymore.
I just teach it now.
Yeah. I think that's why certain clients, they'll like come back after like a year and they'll be like, okay, I just need a little refresher.
Yeah, I need to, exactly.
I need a little clean this up again.
So what's changed in your life?
Exactly. So where am I now?
Yeah.
And you have to do that in order to establish the transformational habits of like, well, this is how I'm going to live
the third
differently.
Step.
You know, a huge part of that is being a student of your story. And I think there is something we're trying to enforce in this season by having people tell a story. And I mean, what moment you would go back to is just well, I think I was expecting it to be like a more humorous thing.
Yeah, lighthearted. It got deep.
Yeah, it got real deep.
Yeah,
and some of the stories were like, really hard. And it's good. Like it's a question also that I've always been obsessed with. If I could go back with all the knowledge I have now and be in that experience, like I would just be amazing.
Oh,
it would be a superpower. And I think I always want
superpower.
As an 8, I always want a superpower.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Engage that moment unaffected because you already know, like, I know how to handle this.
Yeah. I know how to handle this situation.
Yeah.
I know I can succeed in all these different areas. I know which stocks to buy.
Right? Oh my gosh.
But that's the whole thing. I don't want it to become a trap, which it's been for me at times, but I want to understand it. I want to be a student of it. And one of the things that someone said that changed my life was a couple experiences I had as an adult, in my 20s, 30s, where I would tell a story about something that happened to me, but I never really included my participation in that event, in the telling of that story.
Oh, yeah.
And someone said to me, they said, any interpretation of a story that doesn't include you is not a holistic interpretation.
Well, meaning more than just you as victim. Yeah. Because I've told those stories, plenty of them.
Well, and this is one of the things that we've talked about with organizations is a sign of self-mastery. So we talk about like low self-mastery and high self-mastery. Like low self-mastery people, the story that they tell, they are always either the hero or the victim. This happened to me, or this is what I did that was so great.
Yeah.
High self-mastery people, they understand that the hero and the villain run right down the center of them. The victim and the victimizer like runs down the center of me.
Yeah.
Yes, certain things have happened to me that were awful, that I had no say in. Yeah. And that sucks. But I am still responsible for doing the upcycle work of turning that into a redemptive story. And so many people have as great examples to us. Oh my gosh. Right?
Yes.
But I also have to own so many different situations that were painful to me. I am not really being realistic and holistic about them if I'm not actually saying what my contribution to that was. Yeah.
And then the hero is different, but for the hero one, I insist on telling the story of the art of growth in the most unimpressive way. Like, sure, we have all these podcasts and they've done well, right? So we've got all this stuff. Coaching's gone really well.
Yeah.
We're growing, all this wonderful stuff, right? But when I tell the story of how we started out, I insist on, I'm the blind squirrel that just happened to find the nut. And I don't know how I found the nut. It just like stumbled onto it. Like,
that's true.
Yeah. Because it is true.
Yeah.
I'd like to tell the story in a way that makes me sound like that I had thought it through, or that I
Right.
had planned it out, or that somehow I followed the right path, or I had the insight, or I had the
Yeah.
wisdom. It really isn't that true. There are parts of it that have truth to it,
Yeah.
but the vast majority is like, oh no, this is like a stumbling onto it.
Yeah.
This is I've made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
This is one in which there are a lot of other heroes in the story, and I like to talk about them as well. Like how amazing these people are that entered into the story of the art of growth. And because of that, like I love boasting about Sarah. Right?
Oh, Sarah,
Oh my
Suzanne,
gosh.
Laura, huge impact.
Yeah.
Well, because I think we tell the story of the accidental beginning success, which is 100% true. That was a blind. But after the accidental came the intentional
Yes.
through all of these people
Oh, yeah,
with
for
us.
sure. Yeah.
Who completely altered and changed the trajectory, and the intentionality is what has made it a success.
Yeah. Right.
I mean,
That's
it was
true.
like
That's
an
true.
accidental,
Yeah.
successful podcast, but it has been a very intentional trying to build the business.
Yeah. Intentional in the sense of like intentional and very present to what is in front of us. Like not intentional in the sense of like we mapped this whole thing out.
Right.
Like we had this amazing 5-year plan that we actually made happen.
Right.
It's more of like, oh, I think this is where we're going. And but leveraging the gifts of all the types around us. Like I think you're absolutely right in terms of telling stories. It's like your growth tends to bring you more towards like I'm the hero of my story in the sense of the hero's journey, you know,
journey, right.
That kind of hero. Yeah, absolutely. And you have to be the hero of your own story. But there is no hero of any single story that is the only hero or the superhero. It is a collection of heroes coming together, working together. It is a lot of mistake making. It is a lot of in the moment recognizing that I'm really holding on to this, but I have to release this. And then something else comes into that. I think it's much more complicated, but in the present, it isn't. In the present moment, there's always the thing that you know is like, this is in front of me and this is what I have to deal with. If you pay attention to it. Otherwise, we get distracted by everything else that we really don't have much control of. Like a 5-year plan, like this is exactly how it's going to work out, or this is what we're going to, well, yeah, maybe. But more likely, there's something in front of you right now. And if you take that step, then it'll bring you to the next step. Anyways, that's a little bit of a divergence from the whole thing of story. But
well, this popped into my head, which is the contrast in movies we watch, whatever, the contrast between the hero and the superhero.
Oh,
so
interesting. Okay.
I want to do a delineation between the hero versus the superhero. So I'm going to use Frodo and Superman as my examples. So like Frodo is the hero's journey. So a lot of weaknesses, not big in stature, not of a significant background, no real abilities to speak of, makes a lot of mistakes, stumbles, falls, fear,
giving
afraid,
into fear at times.
Yes, giving into all kinds of things, wanting to escape, wanting to do this, but still staying the path. That's the hero. That's what a real hero is.
Yeah.
Superhero is escapism.
Yeah.
So the superhero is I'm unaffected.
Yeah.
So we have to invent, well, you know, this is Superman. He's from another place. He is impenetrable, can, fly, super strength, just superhero. So we have to invent something called kryptonite that even gives him any kind of weakness in order to bring any drama to the story, because otherwise, nothing will affect him.
Absolutely.
And nothing can do. I think we're drawn to superheroes because it's escapists.
Yeah.
We don't want to face our weaknesses, but we're really drawn to the hero and their frailty because we find it more relatable.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see this arc in entertainment. So like, I remember the action movies of the 90s. It was all like the one guy versus 20 guys that run in the room. They just beat them all up. And they don't have a scratch on them. Right. So it's a superhero. And I loved those as like a martial arts fan of the
Steven
kid.
Seagal.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Did he ever get hurt?
I don't think he ever got hurt.
Once?
No.
I don't think he ever got hit.
No.
Like, and that's sort of this like illusion versus like, I think one of the reasons that, Rocky won an Oscar, he loses at the end of the first movie.
Yeah.
He's completely beat up. but he showed up.
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about like becoming the hero of your own story, like you're the hero, not the superhero. Like you are not impenetrable. You don't have superpowers. Like there's a fantasy in that. And those movies make a lot of money because we like the escapism of that.
Yeah.
Because you always know that these guys are going to win.
Yeah. I think all of our narrow stories, the ones that we have told ourselves that we have lived from, have a tendency to protect us from life. It's a way of protecting us from the worst part. Even if they're negative stories, it's like still a way of protecting us from the worst part of living. And I think that's what the true sage does, is the true sage, he or she, invite us into our own journey. And it means that we're going to face the dragon. We're going to have to, we're going to have to face all of our fears, all of our struggles, all of our weaknesses. Yeah. And that's when we learn, that's how we grow. We don't grow by the protection of our stories. We grow oftentimes by living more deeply into the larger story and the story that is being told that is bigger than us.
Right.
And I think that in some sense, in one sense, it's like being called out into that story.
Yeah.
But I want to be careful to say, but it's not a story that is not about you. Like you have to leave your own. The story you've been telling about yourself is one fragment, and it is a very limiting story. There's a much bigger one that's already in you and around you and beyond you. Yeah. And that is what we're being invited to discover more. So, yeah, I love this.
Yeah, this is good stuff. But this is why we did this season, is this, there's an aspect of becoming a student of your story. And so people are calling and telling stories. Yeah. And then we are responding to those stories through the lens of the Enneagram, through the lens of a coach, and saying this is how we'd respond to those stories as far as like we want to live into them and learn from them. And so we're hoping people will learn from the stories that come through. And I think they will. I feel like, in the podcast we've already recorded, I've learned from some of these stories and will continue to do so. And so I'm really excited that people can step into this, and hopefully what will come to mind is more of their own stories. They can become more of a student of their stories. So they do have that self-knowledge piece to develop the self-observation piece, because like where we can go from looking in the rearview mirror, which we have a perspective on that maybe we need to reinterpret and go through that. But that pulls us into the present of being able to observe ourselves in real time so that we can make the transformational habits of stepping forward in whatever it takes to do that. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us and for listening. We always close with a benediction. But before we do that, I wanted to remind you that you can sign up for our newsletter at theartofgrowth.org, and there will be information about our 2 new group coaching courses that will start in March. When we do these groups, I often read this poem from my book called And I Would Lift You. And it's the mission, the overall feel that we want to have for our group coaching groups. It's called a sacred circle. And so wherever you are, I hope that you have a sacred circle around you that can fulfill this kind of a mission. So let's just close with this. This is a sacred circle where everything is welcome and everything belongs. Come and sit in this circle where there is nothing between us but the distance we've traveled and the fire that keeps us warm. In this circle, your story is sacred ground. We will hold your failures like fine china, your trauma and tears like crystal. And we will celebrate your victories as if they were our own. We will be a compassionate witness to the twists and turns, the peaks and valleys, the dust and sand and snow that formed the one before us. Our affirmation reminding you it's not over yet. The worst of you is temporary. The best of you is permanent. Come in and be, for there is solid ground beneath you and fresh air all around. Grace and growth, my friends.